Hello, this is going to be a fairly quick video this week. I've already covered most of the other features that I've seen on David Weiss's Flat Earth Clock app. I'll create a playlist and I'll add it right about here so you can watch all the other videos on it. I spent a fair bit of time recently talking about how he goes about representing the moon, and then separately how he represents the sun on his flat earth clock. I'd like to talk this week about the shadow lines that denote night versus day, and I wanted to show some of the things that I found along the way. There are a few issues with the way he determines the displayed date. I've already shown a few videos where I've shown the full high-speed animation and how the hour hand moves slowly across from day to day. And I want to note very quickly that several months it was true for the transition between July and August, the transition between August and September, and I think several more months. This frame here is or should be midnight of August 1st. This one should be midnight August 2nd, and then this one is August 3rd. So these two are in fact two separate days, and you can see that the second hand moves ever so slightly when I switch the two. But the difference in the shadow between August 1st and August 2nd didn't change, but you'll notice that when I go from August 2nd to August 3rd, there's a remarkable change. If you paid attention, I've been putting an animation of every day for the year in a corner, so you should be able to see exactly when it changes every day. But it appears like some days it's going to be the 2nd of the month, and some days it appears it's going to transition on the 3rd of the month. So just to quickly recap, when the moon goes around, it transitions from one position to the next at midnight of every day. The sun seems to sometimes creep ever so slowly from one tropic to the next on a daily basis, and on the 21st or the 22nd or the 23rd, the sun will often make a giant leap from one position to the next. And now it seems the shadow changes dramatically on either the 2nd or the 3rd of every month. So for an entire month, it seems to use this exact same shape. And again, I would like to point out that most of this is probably true on the high speed advance mode, and that maybe when it's at standard speed, all of these transitions occur on the same day, and that the displayed date is the correct date. But I would have to go and pay really close attention to those transitions at midnight to make sure that everything works properly as I would have expected. But in this video, I really wanted to focus mainly on how this app deals with drawing the shadow portion, which is supposed to represent the night, versus the lighter part, which is supposed to represent daylight. March 1st, you can see that it's over here. March 2nd, you can see that it's already changed. And March 3rd, it seems to be the same as March 2nd, and the only difference why it seems to be slightly different is because I took every so many frames from the original animation that is supposed to represent midnight every day, and that the app that renders this high-speed animation doesn't really do a good job at picking a consistent time every day. So that's why the time is slightly different between March 1st and March 2nd. And the difference between March 2nd and March 3rd is another 10-15 minutes, which is why the shadow is not quite in the same spot. But one thing that I also noticed in all of this is that if I look at this one, which is pretty much for the month of February, up to March 2nd, I was able to quickly eyeball this, and it looks like this side is relatively flat, but this side looked fairly round like this. To give you a better idea, I'm going to play around with the contrast and brightness, and I'm going to put the contrast really high so you can see how this looks roundish on this side, and this looks fairly flat on this side. In fact, it looks like there's a little bit of a divot over here, and if I play around with the brightness level a little bit more, you can see how this sort of starts to be a little bit more round like this. So the way it appears to me how they went about implementing this, they wanted to show a lighter patch and a darker patch. And the way they probably would have done that would have been to create a separate layer in something like Photoshop. They would have made the layer semi-transparent, so it's not fully opaque and it's not fully transparent, so it's probably somewhere in the middle over here. If I wanted to replicate how they would have gone about implementing the terminator line for the equinox, which would have been how it should have looked around March 21st or around September 21st or thereabouts, they probably would have started off with something like this. And I'm just removing a little bit of extra material here, and you'll see why in a second. So they would have shaped it more or less how they wanted it, kind of. And then if they choose kind of an airbrush, they could play around with the different values over here. And then they would have just gone back and forth. What this would have done is it would have created a slightly softer transition between the two, so the dark half versus the light half. And so now if I increase the opacity like this here, you can see that it's a little bit fuzzier around the edges like this. And with just about the right value, you could pretty much guess that that's how they would have done that. And then at that point, they would have just exported this as a separate individual image with a transparent background. So they probably have PNGs in the application that represent each of the 12 months. If they transition every month, which is how it appears to me to be, then they probably only have 12 of those shadow images. And then finally, the last thing is that they would have just taken that image as required and they would have rotated it like this on top of the AE map. So just to recap what I can gather from the clock portion itself of this flat earth and zodiac clock, whatever he calls it. It definitely looks like he's stacking a whole bunch of static images one on top of the other, and he's rotating them as required, building the image up in terms of layers. And in the case of the day versus night portions, it almost certainly looks like they've gone to the effort of doing a fairly poor job of photoshopping the terminator lines on a semi-transparent background where the night portion would have been black and the day portion would have just been transparent. And at the start of every month, they just choose a slightly different day-night layer image, and they use that for the next month. I have yet to see any evidence at all using this application that it is trying to use any specific model at all, and that with the appropriate images, I could just as easily recreate a similar clock. Instead of using the AE map like he's done, I could use the picture of a pepperoni cheese pizza. The sun could represent a slice of pepperoni. The moon could represent a green olive. And I wouldn't even have to have the sun and the moon follow any pattern. I could pretend that the sun is Pac-Man and that the moon is the ghosts, and the two could just be chasing each other around on the surface of this magical pizza and claim that this represents reality, and it would be just as viable as an explanation as this app. That's going to be it for now. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, I would appreciate the thumbs up, the subscribe, comment below, all that other good YouTube stuff. I'm going to see you again in another video soon enough. So bye for now.